Once again, returning to Inside the Jackal's Head is the one and the only, the psychic lawyer himself, Mr. Mark Anthony. How are you doing, sir? Welcome
I'm
back.
doing fantastic. Thank you. It's really great being back on the show.
You know, it's been a few months, been a while since you've been here, but you know, I loved the last time you were here. It was so much fun having you on, and you're a really cool person to talk to. And you've been busy since the last we spoke. You have a new book out that just came out recently, and let's talk about that a little bit. Right off the bat, I want to talk about this book, Evidence of Eternity, because I was reading the bio earlier, and you know, anything that has to do with eternity, the afterlife, I'm always intrigued. As you know, tell us about the book.
Evidence of Eternity, it has just been phenomenal since it's been released in March. Within 10 days, the publisher was completely sold out. It's in a second and even larger printing, and I believe it's going into a third printing soon. So I've been on a whirlwind tour. The week it came out, I was in Houston, and then I was in Atlanta, and I just returned from Los Angeles, and I'm getting ready to do a tour of the Tampa Bay area, then go back to Atlanta because I've been invited to be on the NBC morning show in Atlanta. And one of the reasons that Evidence of Eternity is getting so much press is that it's different than anything else any other medium has written. It explains spirit communication in terms of scientific principles, theoretical physics, human physiology, evidence, and it shows how faith and science are not opposed, that they actually are talking about a lot of the same things when it comes to energy, frequency, and the reality of the afterlife.
Now, let's get into what is the reality of the afterlife. What exactly, for the audience listening in who has not made up their mind, what is your definition of the reality of the afterlife?
Based on, since the dawn of time, people have reported communicating with spirits, getting visitations from loved ones on the other side. Now, there's a lot of people say, oh, well, that's just wishful thinking and grief-induced hallucinations, except it's been going on for over 5,000 years and very heavily documented. All of the major belief systems and religions talk about the soul, the spirit that is, that pre-exists the body, comes into the body, and then moves on. In the 20th century, starting in the 1970s, survival of consciousness studies began in earnest, not just in the United States, but in Canada, the UK, Holland, France, Italy, Germany, India, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Russia, and Japan. And survival of consciousness studies and near-death experience studies are where people who have clinically died and then come back to life, usually for either they've been resuscitated or there's no explanation why else, and they just came back. And what they describe when they have separated from their body, their consciousness leaves their body, goes into this tunnel of light, encounters deceased loved ones, and then talks about God. What I do as a medium is I practice what is known as evidential mediumship, because there's a lot of people that can just say, oh, well, your grandfather's here and he loves you and he's proud of you. But evidential mediumship is when a spirit communicates with me and presents pieces of evidence, things that I simply cannot know. And you know, it's of course the debunkers go, you're cold reading, you know, but that's like a toddler running around with a new word like impossible, impossible, impossible. They don't really understand what they're talking about, but they like to babble it. And, well, I've studied evidential mediumship both here in the U.S. and in Great Britain, and the British evidential mediumship is very strict and very disciplined. I have to bring forth facts, evidence, things, not generalizations. I mean, anybody can say, oh, so-and-so loves you, but when you say, this is what he looked like, this is what he died from, this was his favorite song, this is something that you did yesterday, okay, very specific things. And go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought. Sorry.
No. And so it's by using evidence to prove that life is everlasting, by spirits communicating this information. And it's not just that they sit there and give me a description of the person. They will talk about what's going on in a loved one's life here, and occasionally they will convey things about the other side, what is it like, which is very, very difficult for us to understand because they're existing they are pure consciousness and they are existing in a purely energetic environment.
Stop right there for a second.
Yeah.
Now, this is why I asked the question, what is your definition of the afterlife? Is it a physical realm, a spiritual realm, an energy realm? That is the basic question.
I don't believe that it's a physical realm. We are in the physical realm.
Right.
We are, and because our soul, our spirit is an immortal living being, and it's temporarily encapsulated in a human body. Mm-hmm. And by being in a human body, the consciousness is temporarily housed in the brain, which is an organ extremely complex, but mm-hmm. one which has a finite perception of things and a finite ability to understand things. And there seems to be reasons for that. In other words, coming into this life is a privilege, although many days don't seem like it is.
Oh, definitely not.
There's a lot of days that it's like, why am I here? I'm suffering.
Today was one of them.
Well, and especially when somebody you love dies, or
right.
people who are suffering from horrible illnesses and things, or people that are living under oppression and violence. I mean, you're looking at this going, how could this possibly be a privilege? But right. It appears that we can experience sensations, things that you cannot on the other side. Now, to answer your question, is it an energy or is it spirit realm? It's energy. It's energy and it's a spirit realm, although I don't know if you or I can possibly comprehend exactly what it is.
Right.
And there's this thought in mediumistic mm-hmm. circles, as above, so below. And mm-hmm. I hear that mm-hmm. so much. And one of the main purposes of evidence of eternity is to dispel the primitive fear and superstition surrounding spirit communication. And that mm-hmm. as above, so below thing, look, they're not sitting, when somebody comes through, oh, he's sitting at a cafe in Paris or hanging out on a beach in Maui. No, they're not. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What they're doing is they're projecting to us a point of reference that you and I can relate
understand.
To.
Right.
Yeah, so maybe your mom really liked Maui. I mean, I've been to Maui, and it's like, who couldn't like Maui? Okay,
no kidding.
But okay, that may have been the place that she was the happiest ever, and so they're going to give me and you a point of reference that we can relate to, and she was happiest as she was in Maui, and she feels great, so that way we're understanding that she's in tremendous joy and peace. But where they really are would require the ability for you and I to comprehend infinity, which our brain can't. But that doesn't mean we don't know it's there. That we can't understand that it exists. But as far as actually grasping, comprehending what it is beyond our limited, finite ability to perceive, which is okay because we are here in a finite matter for a variety of reasons.
Right. Now, yeah, we're still trying to wrap our heads around with infinite space, let alone now going into a spiritual realm and talking about infinity in that term. I mean, it can get really, really crazy. Yeah, it can get really crazy for anybody.
Yeah,
trying to wrap their heads around it.
Well, the universe. I mean, we look at stars every night. Okay, and let's say a star is 8,000 mm-hmm. light years away, and that
right.
star went supernova and exploded 7,000 years ago. Well, we're still going to be seeing it because it takes the light from that star 8,000 right. years just to get to us, even though it doesn't exist in the same time frame that we are existing. All right, It's hard enough understanding that,
yeah.
let alone, and then I love it when they talk about, when they meaning theoretical physicists and astrophysicists and scientists, that the universe is constantly expanding.
Right.
Well, that's cool, but what is it expanding into?
Right.
It's like, okay,
well, yeah,
so
if it's expanding, there's something outside of it.
Into something, which once again, when you try to understand that and you try to grasp infinity, you simply can't. And that's because of the way our brain is designed. But our brain, our mind, and our consciousness are two different things. I was a guest speaker alongside Dr. Evan Alexander, who wrote Proof of Heaven. He comes under fire by the debunkers and the religious fanatics, like I do, and we both got a good laugh out of that. And for all you people who fall into that category, we forgive you. But what he was saying is his critics are like, oh, well, your consciousness doesn't survive your physical death. And his question and my question is, well, then explain what consciousness is. And if you look at any book on the human brain, a medical book on the physiology and the structure of the human brain, there could be 1,000 pages on the brain's functions, the axons, which is like the wiring of the brain, the neurosynapses, and all of that, the electrical flow through the brain, and maybe a paragraph on consciousness. Medical science cannot define or describe what consciousness is. And they say, well, we can poke and prod and stimulate certain parts of the brain and recreate a spiritual experience. It's like, and so what?
Like the article I read before we had you on the show here, where neuroscientists have succeeded recently in a lab creating what to the layman would look like ghosts or apparitions. They were creating this using techniques on the brain. And they were conjuring up all kind of ghostly illusions, which tells you, the brain does play a part in it, but where is this stuff coming from, regardless? It's like people who use ayahuasca, for example, or DMT.
They're introducing an artificial stimulus to evoke a particular reaction. Fine, let's remove the artificial from it, and let's say you or I encounter a spirit. Well, obviously the energetic emission is stimulating that part of the brain, because the brain governs our ability to perceive things while we are living in the material world. But just because you can artificially recreate something doesn't mean it's the real deal. Okay? In other words, you can go up to a dead body or a body that is being kept alive artificially, but it doesn't mean that that person is alive.
Are there ghosts around at all times, like in everybody's house, for example? Or they just hang out? I mean, what's the purpose of the afterlife? Because I know that a lot of people talk about having ghosts present. What's the purpose of that if they're just present in everybody's lives?
I think there's a difference between ghosts and spirits.
Spirits, right.
Sometimes they're used interchangeably. Spirits can be with us at any time they want. And heaven, the other side, nirvana, whatever you would like to call it, is not some far-off, distant thing orbiting Alpha Centauri. It is a parallel universe. And when you look at what the string theorists have been saying over the past century...
That's interesting,
they're talking about not just that there's a universe, but there's multiverses and there's different dimensions. So if the other side is a frequency, another dimension that exists parallel to this one, that's why they can pop over so quickly. All right, and it's basically it's the way I like to analogize it. Consider our world being AM radio. We use frequency, amplitude, modulation, and energy, but we're at a lower and slower frequency and vibration. The other side being FM radio, higher, faster frequency. And there are times when if you increase the frequency of AM and you decrease the frequency and slow that down of the FM, the two radio frequencies will overlap. And it's the same in the spirit realm. We have to realize that according to dark matter theorists, only 10% of the multiverses is visible to the human eye and to human-created technology. In other words, you and I can perceive visible light, but we can't see ultraviolet, we can't see X-rays, gamma rays, microwaves. There's so if 90% of the universe and the multiverses are beyond our ability to perceive it, then just because something is beyond our realm of experience or ability to perceive does not mean it isn't there. Look at it this way.
Makes sense.
A couple hundred years ago, when you would, what made people sick? There was all these bizarre it was evil spirits. It was
Mm-hmm.
vapors. You know, like in Gone with the Wind, and those, oh, I'm getting the vapors. You know, they used to think there was these noxious gases that would emerge at night and make people sick. And they had all these very strange ideas on it. And then the microscope gets invented, and doctors and scientists begin to see that germs, viruses, molds, things like that make people sick.
Right.
And just, you know, so just because they couldn't see it didn't mean it doesn't exist.
Right, right. No, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Look, a universe like ours, or a galaxy like ours, there's so much that we don't even know yet just about the physical reality. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's no telling what's out there that we have no clue on because we just can't see it. The veil is completely over our eyes. Now, do you think that we'll ever be able to create some kind of a machine or create some kind of a device that could travel in between parallel universes? Because basically what we're discussing here is that parallel universes are the answers to the afterlife, to heaven and hell. So we leave here, we go there. That has a lot of implications in it. I mean, that almost sounds like, you know, we leave this physical reality, we transport there, and that's a completely type of different physical reality. Maybe physical there, not the same as here, but in a different kind of physicality. But it does seem to fit the superstring theory.
It does. It does. I know that Thomas Edison was working on a device to communicate with the other side. And one of the last things that he was working on, and it was discussed in the Scientific American 1921 edition, it has now euphemistically been nicknamed the spirit phone. But I've read his writings in his diary where he said he believed that he could create a device sensitive enough to communicate with discarnate intelligence. In other words, a phone that can talk to people in spirit. So when you get somebody on that genius level, like a Thomas Edison, I mean, you know, he was like up there with Tesla and Leonardo da Vinci and you know, just these incredible, you know, geniuses. I don't rule out anything, you know, in as far as our creative abilities. My dad, he was one of the NASA pioneers, and he was one of the guys that helped put a man on the moon and also helped figure out how to get Apollo 13 back. And he's real old now, and you know, but every now and then I get him talking about that stuff. And what he told me is, you put enough research and money into something, nothing's impossible.
Oh, yeah. And yet they can't cure cancer.
No, they can't, but our understanding of it is much better than maybe it was 20 years ago. Look at when HIV appeared, I guess it was, I don't know, I guess the early
70s?
70s, late 70s, early 80s. It just decimated, you know, thousands, if not millions of people worldwide. And now there are people who are HIV positive that are living 20 plus years and longer because
Magic
of
Johnson.
Condition.
That's all I have to say.
Magic Johnson. And now there is a treatment, and I was reading about it, where scientists have taken the HIV virus, because it's a very elusive and complicated thing which replicates and changes, and apparently they've taken out whatever it is that, you know, gives you AIDS, but the self-replicating and the mutating virus, and now they're implanting it with things, in other words, so it can attack cancer and other diseases. In other words, they're using its ability to mutate and replicate so it won't kill you. Instead, they're taking the things that make it so damn elusive and difficult to treat and now using it, although they still can't eradicate viruses. So, but you know, in the span of 30 years, going from knowing absolutely nothing about the immune system to now, hey, we've voided out the AIDS part of the virus, and now we're using it in experiments to attack cancer cells. It's like, that's pretty brilliant, you know. But you know, there's still
a lot of this comes, no, obviously not. But a lot of this comes because of course, the advancements in the Human Genome Project and the fact that we know the DNA strand and we know what it does and we know that it's codes and I mean, all the advancements that we are getting is really because of that breakthrough. But even though it does seem like we've gone a lot, we've gone really far with a lot of these technologies, it still feels like we're really behind the curve when it comes to the amount of money that's being pumped into a lot of these things.
We
would
are.
expect for some of this to get cured by now.
Yeah, there's so many things that, for example, what people don't seem to understand in this country is how the space program has benefited us. Because I hear people say, "Oh, why do we waste our money up there?" as they're looking at their cell phone and accessing the internet. And it's like, well, where do you think that technology came from? Or satellites and the medical technology, because technology breeds technology. And the problem we have with and I'm not going to say either Democrats or Republicans, it's presidents from both sides of the aisle. They're not. They look at NASA and space exploration as discretionary spending as opposed to being in our national best interest.
Right.
And a lot of my friends are space scientists, which is great because I can talk to them about this stuff, and they'll say, well, here, read this and check that. And when I was at Harvard, I was talking to some of the scientists and grad students there about the pineal gland and human physiology that lends itself towards the ability to communicate with spirits. And somebody told me that all NASA wanted for the next 10 years was what the U.S. was spending in 1 month when we were engaged in combat in Iraq.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't shock me at all.
Yeah, and now we no longer have a manned space program. It's been dumped onto private corporations who are motivated only by can we make money off of that, which is fine. But when it comes to space exploration, sometimes you have to realize we're not going to make money for a while, but sometimes it's okay to spend money for the sole purpose of acquiring knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Completely agree. Now, here's a question for you that I wanted to ask a little while ago, but I didn't want to deviate from where we were going with the conversation. But going back to where we're talking about the parallel universe, what if there is really no afterlife as a heaven or a hell or anything like that as we believe, but what we're seeing are visions of a parallel universe which is just like ours, and so when we're seeing parents or loved ones, it doesn't mean we're seeing the spirit of the loved ones that we lost, but we're seeing a vision of them in a parallel universe because their loss here somehow dropped the veil a little bit so we can get that glimpse of them on that parallel planet. Does that at all make any sense?
That's an interesting theory, but I don't believe it because in the probably 10,000 readings that I've conducted for people all over the world, when a spirit communicates with me, they're giving me verifiable facts. What they look like, what they died from, shared memories between the person I'm reading for. They can give me their likes and dislikes. They can talk about things that are going on with the person that they love here. So there's too much information that is specific to the person as opposed to we're seeing some type of mirror image in another dimension. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't another dimension, and perhaps part of our spiritual journey is to go from the spirit realm connected with Earth to maybe eventually a spirit realm connected with another planet. I mean, once again...
That's an interesting question. Do you think we could reincarnate into another alien race in another world somewhere?
Yes. Well, as in my book, Evidence of Eternity, has held the #1 spot on Amazon's reincarnation list since its release. I'm a firm believer in reincarnation because the evidence is there. And, more people now believe in reincarnation than ever before in history. Now, yes, there's more people on Earth now, but what I mean by that is traditionally it was Hindus and Buddhists who believed in reincarnation, but now we're seeing that in Europe, in South America, in North America. A lot of people now, what I call spiritual Christians, are not seeing that reincarnation is necessarily opposed to Christian dogma. And so it makes more sense. And the way I explain it, or one of the ways that I explain it in Evidence of Eternity, is that all religions teach that the soul, the spirit, the energy of the spirit pre-exists the body, comes into the body, and then lives on after the body. And physics teaches us that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another.
Right.
So it appears that science and faith are getting closer and closer to each other. In fact, Pope Francis, who I'm a big fan of, I think he's the right guy in the right place at the right time. Pope Francis recently said that the Big Bang does not contradict the creative intervention of God, rather it depends upon it.
And that's interesting.
That's very interesting.
That's heavy, yeah.
That's real heavy. In fact, I think it was under Pope John Paul's watch, or it could have been early during Pope Benedict, when the Vatican said that belief in extraterrestrial life does not contradict Christianity,
right,
because we as humans cannot put limitations upon the creative power of God. So it's like, wow, it's the same institution that had Galileo charged with heresy because he said that the sun is the center of our solar system, not the Earth.
They've definitely evolved, the church.
Well, they also know a lot more than we think, and I've had a number of friends who've been Catholic priests, because going into the clergy was something that I had considered at one point in my life. And what do you think the saints were? When you talk about saints that receive visions and the mystical things that they did, a lot of the saints exhibited psychic and mediumistic abilities. Did you know that there's a patron saint for television?
I did not know that, no.
Yeah, it's, well, listen.
Are you serious?
I'm totally serious. All right,
I would think Oprah would be that saint, by the way. I think it's Oprah.
She should be. She should be. Oprah, if you're listening, we are not worthy.
I am nominating Oprah for Saint Oprah.
She should be. She for a lot of reasons, because she's such a great pioneer and innovator and opened so many doors. But 800 years ago, we've all heard of Saint Francis of Assisi. Well,
correct,
he had a colleague, Clare, Saint Clare of Assisi, and she was a very pious nun and very spiritual. Claire. Yes, she was one of his followers, and she became so ill she could no longer attend church services, so she prayed to God that she would be able to see what was happening in church. And so she would receive visions of what was going on in church and tell people about that, and they said, "Oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what what the priest or the bishop or whoever said." And she died, and within like a year or two of her death, she was canonized Saint Clare of Assisi. Well, 800 years later, in 1958, Pope Pius XII declared her the patron saint of television with the advent of television. Now, when you start examining what St. Clare really was, she was a remote viewer. She had the ability to take her consciousness and observe things in real time, whether it was across the village in Assisi to the cathedral or across the world. And the Vatican is very well aware of these things, and that's why she was declared the patron saint of television. And, people scoff at that, except for the fact that the Soviet Union, the United States, and now Russia, the UK, France, North Korea, China, Japan, Australia, have been using remote viewers in their intelligence agencies for decades. In fact, the British were the first to set up a psychic warfare division back in the 1930s. So maybe MI6 still is doing that. I know the CIA cut funding on it, but the DIA has not.
How interested do you think are the governments in a lot of the stuff that has to do with the afterlife? Do you think because I know they did a lot of remote viewing programs and whatnot. Do you think there's programs in secret that have to do with remote viewing on the afterlife, or any experiments dealing with the afterlife?
Well, remote viewing is not mediumship. Remote viewing
Right.
is a psychic
Two different
skill,
things.
which
Right.
has a very practical application for
Right,
intelligence agencies. Let's find some terrorists, let's find somebody,
And you look how long it took them to find Bin Laden, huh? And Osama.
Yeah, let's get some insight. Well, I did like the movie Zero Dark 30, but
Good movie.
but there are practical applications for that. I know that the Soviets were extremely heavily involved in psychic warfare and psychic phenomenon in the U.S. as well. In fact, I've met some people that are involved with that. They're very interesting. They're very intense, but they're very interesting. But as far as does our government do research on the afterlife, probably not, but you never know.
That would be an interesting fact if we discovered one day that our government had been conducting experiments on how to reach and contact ghosts on the other side. And that they've done it.
How cool would that be? Well, I mean, it'd be great to have that type of funding. I mean, there are institutes that do study psychic and phenomenon in the afterlife, but like any institution or any nonprofit organization, they're always struggling to keep their head financially above water. And no matter what you do, you're always going to have the debunkers and the cynics who are like, there is no afterlife because I don't believe in it. Because I don't believe in it, it must be true. And, I always feel sorry for those people who just believe in nothing.
I'm agnostic myself personally. Borderline atheist in a way, in a lot of ways. But I do believe that there is something more than meets the eye, if you know what I mean. There's something definitely out there. I have a little issues with religions, and that's really where the stem of my issues are. But I do find it funny how science is closely, or not closely, but it's rapidly connecting the dots for religions and for maybe possibly one day proving that there is such a thing as an afterlife. That to me is funny.
Well, there's nothing wrong with being an agnostic, because an agnostic is being skeptical, and a true skeptic says, I don't know what to believe. I don't believe it now, but I'm open to
the possibilities.
Right. Whereas a cynic is like, I have a closed mind, and I'm going to parade around, I have a closed mind, I have a closed mind. It's like I'm wallowing in my ignorance. And that's an unhealthy state of mind because it's a closed mind. It's like minds are like parachutes; they only function properly when they open. So science is beginning to see that there are frequencies, there are realms, there are dimensions separate from our own. And if energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred, and we have all these survival of consciousness studies that all indicate that our consciousness survives our physical death, then I think it's only a matter of time before we get to that point. For me, the technology already exists. It's people like myself that are mediums who are born with the ability to perceive spirits, and we all are capable of having a spiritual experience or a mediumistic experience because we all have the same basic physiology. It's just that some people are better at it than others. That some people are better mathematicians, some people are better auto mechanics, some are better athletes or musicians and what have you. So we're all good at different things.
Now, how would one go about trying to harness this ability? If one wanted to, obviously.
Yeah, there's all types of development classes. I remember one of the first classes I went to, it's we would hold an object that belonged to another person, and this is called psychometry because the theory there is that matter retains vibration. And, of course, metallic objects seem to be better at it than, electricity flows through steel a lot better than it would a piece of wood,
Right.
And I remember there were people in the class, and they're struggling and go, well, I'm seeing the color blue associated with you. And somebody'd say, well, yeah, I like the color blue. And then I'd be holding and go, okay, somebody gave you this ring, and they were in the military, and what I get is that they died from a heart attack, and he liked this song, and I'd be going through all this stuff, and I remember the instructor said, Mark, can you stay after class? And I said, Okay. And it's like, gee, did I do anything wrong? I went to Catholic school, so it's like when you had to stay after class, it usually wasn't good. And I remember he goes, I've never seen anything like you. He goes, my God. He goes, how long have you been doing this? I go, well, I've been in your class 2 weeks. He said, you're functioning on a level of someone that's been doing this 30 years.
Huh.
And, and I knew I had ability because I grew up in this environment. And I remember him saying, he goes, I can't really teach you anything. He goes, I can show you how to interpret some of the information that you're getting. He goes, but I can't do this. And I was like, well, come on. I mean, you're just being nice to me. He goes, no, really. And so what happened was he told me that I needed to go to Great Britain. He said, there is a college there, an institute for the development of, an institute for the advancement of psychic science. And I went there, and it's like Hogwarts, for psychics, and it was really quite wonderful because we studied it in a very clinical and scientific manner instead of the woo-hoo, oh, as above, so below, and they're coming forward and bringing you a bucket of granola and that sort of thing. And that's what I like, because being an attorney, evidence appeals to me. Fact and logic appeals to me, as opposed to things that don't have any basis or substantiation.
Now, when you were getting this information, though, was it just information just coming to you? Were you being told? Like, did you hear a voice? How were you receiving this information?
All the above. And honing your ability is learning how to pay attention to that. And like I was doing a reading for a woman today, and every time I would say, all right, I'm seeing this, does this make sense? There was this long pause, and she was a very analytical person, started pick, and I said, all right, now stop. You're doing what I used to do. You're cross-examining everything. Okay, when something comes in, feel it. What do you feel? And then as soon as she started doing that, then everything began to make sense, as opposed to let me pick. And what it comes down to is our right brain is the emotional and the intuitive side. The left brain is the logical side. Mm-hmm. And so when you're doing this work, you have to kind of push the left brain out of the way. And when something comes in, you just describe it before you overanalyze it. And then once you describe it, then you can go back and look at it and say, okay, now this has more meaning to it on more than one level. And that's one of the concepts that I write about in Evidence of Eternity, is that there are things known as multiple meaning messages, where one image, one sensation can have more than one level, more than one type of meaning. And what I'm doing in Evidence of Eternity that no one else is doing or has done is I'm introducing new terms and concepts to explain spirit communication on the basis of science and theoretical physics, and in 21st century terminology, because our understanding of mediumship was developed in the Victorian era, and there it has stayed. And it's time to bring this up into our current era and apply what we now know about energy transfer, telecommunications, frequency, vibration, multiple dimensions, and multiverses.
Very interesting stuff. The book, again, is Evidence of Eternity, Communicating with Spirits for Proof of the Afterlife. Mark, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for spending your time with us here tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And to all the listeners, may God bless you.
And I'll be picking up the book, reading it, and we'll be talking again on Future Theater pretty soon, and I'll have read it by then, and I'll have a lot more questions your way.
Fantastic. I look forward to it.
Love having you on, my friend. You're definitely a good guy to have on the show. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a good night. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Mark Anthony. This is Inside the Jackal's Head. We went over just a little bit, but it was so worth it. Great guest. Pick up the book on Amazon.com right now. Evidence of Eternity, Communicating with Spirits for Proof of the Afterlife. Now, as you know, I'm not exactly, like I said, I'm agnostic. I'm open-minded. Am I all the way a believer? Not necessarily 100%, but I am open-minded. And he's a fascinating individual. If you want to hear or you want to read more on our guest tonight, please check out his website, www.healgriefwithbelief.com. That's www.healgrief WITHBELIEF.com. And again, pick up the book at Amazon.com. Everybody will be back next week with more Inside the Jackal's Head.